But there needs to be a distinction. And this is important, and I hope I don't confuse anybody. Please do everything you can to stick with me for the next couple minutes, because it may get kind of difficult. We have to make a distinction between judgment and discernment, because on the surface they appear very similar. But scripturally, there is a world of difference. Within the church, we are called to be non-judgmental, but at the same time, we are called to be discerning. How else could we be anything else and then practice what Matthew 18 says? Matthew 18 says if somebody sins and refuses to repent even after we have gone to them and encouraged them and asked them, don't do this, what is the next step? They have to be removed from the church, because we cannot leave. It's like, I once used the example of cancer. If you don't deal with cancer, it spreads through the body. But the Bible doesn't use the word cancer. The Bible uses the word leaven. Sin is like leaven. And if you leave it in the body, it will permeate. Just like a little bit of leaven goes in the lump and it permeates and makes the lump bigger, that same thing will happen in the church if it's not dealt with. That's the job. That's why we call people to account. And it begins with your leadership. I'm called to account. But the point is this. The difference, the distinction between judging and discerning is this. The distinction is in the motivation. If you want to write that down, put it in your checkbook and take it to the bank. That is the difference. The difference between judgment and discernment is in motivation. Because the same thing, depending upon the motivation, can be right or it can be wrong. For instance, you got a little baby. The baby's screaming. And you go shove a needle in the arm of the baby. That's not good. But if that needle contains the life-saving medicine that baby needs, then you're a hero. You see the difference? The same action is sticking the needle in that, and that baby doesn't care because he doesn't like it, whether it's mean or whether it's with medicine. The baby doesn't know, but the motivation is different, and it changes the entire outlook of what's being done. Right? The same way when we think about this subject. The same thing can be noted in regards to judgmentalism. If I were to go to a person and condemn them for whatever sin, we'll use drunkenness just because that's an easy one. If I had to go to a person, I condemn them for their drunkenness because I feel morally superior to them, then I'm going with wrong motivation. If I go to them and I go to them because I want to condemn them, or let me put it a second way. If I don't go to them, but I go to somebody else. There's the big one. Judging becomes judging big time when the person doesn't even know they're the object of the judge. Because you got somebody who's here, they're doing something wrong, and instead of going to you and saying, brother, I notice that you're in sin and I'm motivated by love for you and I want to encourage you out of that. Instead, I go over here and I talk to person B about him. And that guy over there is a drinker. I'd go talk to him, but he wouldn't listen to me. I'll talk to you, though, because you'll listen to me. One person gossips, two persons gossip. And becomes judgmentalism, doesn't it? It becomes, he doesn't really deserve to be talked to. We would never say that. Oh my goodness, Pastor, we never say he doesn't deserve to be talked to. He doesn't deserve it. But is he receiving it? No. We'd rather judge him than to go to him. This hard stuff, this is practical. Tonight's message is very practical because it deals with how we handle things. Because ultimately, the motivation behind discernment is always restoration. That's our motivation, is restoration. Now, if a person has said, I don't want anything to do with you, don't want anything to do with the church, don't want anything to do with God, don't want anything to do with this, and you guys are wrong and evil and whatever, and I hate you, whatever. Okay. That's fine. We've done our job. But at the same time, if there's a person in our midst who's got this battle with sin, and we rather talk about them than talk to them, if we'd rather deal with them in our little small groups rather than dealing with them individually, then we are having a problem. And we're condemning somebody. That's the key, is the word condemn. You know what it feels like to be condemned? I tell you what it feels like to be condemned. Go to a independent Baptist church and preach out of an ESV. I'm not being ugly. I've been there. And when they open their Bible and they see you're not using the King, they don't have to tell you they're judging you at all. Judgment is often felt. And see, when people come into the church and they feel like they're being judged rather than they're being accepted, especially, let's look at this from a real quick point of view. If somebody comes in who's unsaved and they feel like they're being judged rather than they're being received, number one, are we being like Christ? And number two, are they going to ever seek this as the place where they find Christ if God is calling them? No. That's the thing. Is we have to get past this. Because, let me tell you, the world is not wrong when it says that we have a very judgmental spirit in the church. We have to be able to get past that. We have to be able, and this is the way we deal with things. Somebody who is not a Christian, somebody who is not a believer, not a professor of Christ, don't expect anything. And then you'll never be disappointed. I got cousins, man. I got relatives. I got people, that I love to death. And I don't want to see them come to Christ. And many of them haven't. And I get calls all the time. Oh, did you know about so-and-so got caught up in such and such? You know what I say? I'm not surprised. Because they don't know Jesus. Why would I be surprised if a sinner acts like a sinner? Now I'm surprised when I get a call and somebody says, hey, I can't say it. I can't say anybody in here. I use Jack because he knows that he didn't really do this. But if somebody calls and says, I heard Jack was a drunk, then we got to do, we know you're not, so that's why we're talking. But you see what I'm saying is I wouldn't expect that because Jack is an elder. He claims to be a believer, and I believe he is a believer. So in that, then I would go to Jack. And I would encourage him out of his sin. I would encourage him, find out that's the truth and talk to him about it. But even then, I wouldn't go to him to judge him. I would go to him to restore him. And I would hope it would be the same for me. That if I were in sin, that it wouldn't be a judgmental thing. That it wouldn't be, like I said, small groups that sit around talking about someone. But would rather, if I'm sinning, come to me. If Jack's sinning, we go to Jack. If Jim's sinning, we go to Jim. To restore, not to condemn. That's the motivation. That's the motivation. And that's what makes discernment different from judgment. Judgment seeks condemnation. Discernment seeks restoration. That's the difference. And like I said, if you got somebody in your life who is an unbeliever, don't be surprised when they live like an unbeliever. Pray for their salvation. Let me tell you something. You talking to them about their morals and their ethics and all that, it's going to be like water off a duck's back. It's going to roll right off because they're not saved. You need to be talking to them about Jesus. You can't go to a person who doesn't know Christ and explain to them why their sin is wrong outside of Christ and expect their morals to change. It won't happen. This is why Paul tells us, I believe it's in 1 Corinthians when he tells us, he says, we don't judge the world because they're acting like the world. He says, but we do have discernment in the church. Because in the church we're called to the standard of being like Christ. And I guess maybe I'm off the subject a little bit, but my point is this. No time is it ever right to condemn. If we have unsaved friends, relatives, and loved ones, we're to seek that they know Christ. If we have people who are saved who fall into sin, we're to seek their restoration. But never are we to seek anyone's condemnation, because that's not our job. It is God who saves. It is God who condemns. It is not us. And when we see that word, oh man, that reminds us, you are